Thanks, Dan. So, quick housekeeping, some agenda. I'm the suit guy. I'm not wearing the hoodie, but we do have our hoodie guy over here. So you have to listen to me for about 10 minutes, some business slides, and then I make everyone go through that, right? On all my sales calls. You got to listen to me before you get the demo. We'll do a demo, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Simon already passed out his card. He's AutoRABIT. We've got a couple other AutoRABIT guys back here, and Abhi, and our names are up here, Patrick Boyle. So before we get into it, I want to tell you a little bit about who AutoRABIT is and give you a sense of our approach to DX, why we're here. When I say here, not here in this room, but why are we in the market? We're an ISV, and what do? We solve the problem of DevOps, generally, an ALM solution for Salesforce developers. So our clients are typically large enterprises. They have between 10 and 100 developers running on teams, and of course, you're going to bump into each other if you're doing some real development. So, long story short, we've been around 2 years, 75 people roughly. We're all over the world, mostly here in San Ramon and in India. We got some presence in Australia and Europe. And as I mentioned, the clients are larger enterprises. Show of hands, has anyone heard of AutoRABIT before today? Okay, excellent. Another show of hands real quick, because I don't want to talk too much smack about Salesforce. How many Salesforce guys do we have in the house? Cool. So one of the things I work with my clients on is I empathize with them, which is, hey, you want to run faster, you want to do more with Salesforce, but it's a clicks not code platform. They kind of left you high and dry. Now you started with 2 developers, 2 admins, a release manager, whatever, but now you're up to 10. We've got a number of clients that have 100 people on their team, 100 developers, all dedicated to Salesforce, okay? And that's a mixture of declarative guys and programmatic guys, right? So that's where we're coming from, and I'm taking this time to explain this because that affects our approach to DX. What was DX to us? Okay, is DX a AutoRABIT killer? Is DX a the final solution for DevOps for Salesforce, or is it some piece? So another quick show of hands. Who thinks DX is an end-to-end solution? Anybody? Who for the most people in the room, who thinks DX, when I say DX, you think scratch orgs? Okay, so we're on the same page. That's kind of what we think, okay? And who is comfortable with a CLI? Guys, this is a developer user group. Let's hope there's a lot of people here, okay? But my clients, who we're, helping on a daily, day-to-day basis, right? They don't want a CLI, right? That scares them away, right? They're clicks, not code, right? So we got to serve them. There's a huge army of people out there that can't handle the CLI. So now I'll jump into the slides. So what was our approach to Salesforce DX? It's the same as we brought to everything else. I'm not going to go into the whole solution here, but we're end-to-end, requirements to release, process for developing on Salesforce. And the basic tenets of that is open to all, because you got a lot of declarative guys out there that are changing stuff in the sandboxes, and we need to promote that, right? We want to remove all development and release overhead generally, right? We want to improve the quality. We want to keep everybody from overwriting each other's code, of course, a lot of little things, right? And facilitate collaboration. So when DX enters the picture, what do we do with DX? We do the same thing we just talked about there. This may not be as an appropriate slide for us, but from end to end here, requirements to release, it's not quite mapping that way, but then top to bottom. For us, scratch orgs are in the upper left, right? They're part of the environment management. Most teams don't approach DX with, out of the box. Since the two-person team is not going to say, hey, let's jump right into DX. It's usually a last thing. Very advanced teams are going to bring in the scratch orgs. So let's move on from that slide. It's not terribly useful. Here's one that I was showing at the campfire session at Dreamforce a couple months back. So if you bucket the release process, or you bucket the whole process into dev and then some testing, or demo to the business or demo to the test scripts, whatever, and then deploy, what does DX do? DX is just an additional, for us again, scratch orgs. It's an additional piece in the dev bucket. But you can't consider it alone. How do you get those changes in the scratch orgs, all the way up to production? So that's where AutoRABIT fits in. We integrate with these guys, the scratch orgs. At the same time, we integrate with a regular sandbox, and then we pull everything together, merge it, with whatever repository and merging capabilities you desire, and promote it upstream all the way to deployment. This is a slide that I would use at Campfire, again, at Dreamforce. And, I'd ask the audience, what do you want to see? Does this scare you? They're like, yeah, this scares us. It doesn't scare you. Some of the people that here were like, finally, a CLI, yay. But that's not something that the declarative guys want to see. So what do we do? What put Salesforce on the map? It was, something a little bit easier, right? Are you going to keep typing help, -H and get all the commands there? Or do you want to look at something like what AutoRABIT has built? And this is a screenshot. We're going to get into a live demo here. But you can see from this screen here, we could do everything you would do via the CLI with a click button, okay? So we've taken it, dumbed it down, made it a simple user interface for the whole team, so that we can have the collaboration, we can have everybody involved, and of course the goal is higher productivity. We won't spend a lot of time on this because Abhi will show us a live demo, but the point is, for AutoRABIT, the mission was to take that CLI and make it more usable. Another screenshot, same thing. All the features that you would pull into a scratch org, with your commands on the CLI, you're going to do with the drop-down box here. So nothing gets left behind. And we have a number of clients that are using DX now. A handful, right? They're beta customers for Salesforce, or they were, and DX, the scratch orgs, are GA now. They're using our solution. It's working out pretty nice. SunPower, Capital One, Schneider Electric, another big showcase customer for Salesforce. They're using the DX solution right now. And then I think Coca-Cola is coming online. They were delayed. They should have been do it by now. And that's it. It's demo time. So we got a minute while Abhi comes over here. I can answer questions for the business side, and we will have Q&A at the end. But if anyone has a question now, I'm happy to answer.
So what's your licensing model?
Per seat, per developer.
So per developer.
Yep.
What's the retail price?
Retail price. Talk to me afterwards. It's between $150 and $299 a month, per user per month. It's competitive. It's right there. It's the market. It's right there. The ROI is, buy our tool or hire another 10 guys, and all in, that's what, $300,000.
All right, so I hope you guys can hear me still on the mic. I'm going to use this stand here just to make it easier for me to speak. But basically, what I'm going to show today is how what we deem as AutoRABIT DX works. What we're going to do first is I want to show you Jira. So Jira is one of the ALM solutions or project management solutions that we integrate with. We do integrate with other solutions like version 1, CA Agile, and a few others. And with respect to the demo, I'm going to stick to Jira. Now you'll see here, I created a user story called Bay Area Dev Group. And I'm going to use this user story throughout today's demo. So before I even get started with the demo, how many of you guys have actually used Salesforce DX with a show of hands? Anybody played around with it before? Okay, a few of you guys, cool. So I'm sure some of you guys that have used it will agree with me. When it comes to Salesforce DX, there's a lot of functionality in there. However, it's all CLI based. And just as Patrick was saying, for a hardcore developer, it's perfect. You love the CLI, you like to put all these commands. But what I also use the CLI a lot. And from my perspective, I found myself using the help command more than often than I would like to. So what we did is we brought the CLI into a UI framework. So we're able to do most of the things you do in Salesforce DX from a CLI perspective, such as registering a dev hub, creating scratch orgs, assigning specific permissions to that scratch org, and whatever commands you have within the Salesforce CLI, we can do that within AutoRABIT. So let's jump right into this. Now, what you're going to see here is the AutoRABIT UI. And you see down here, there's DX beta. So we are currently in beta. We're actually running pilots with some of our customers, like Schneider Electric, for example, that Patrick spoke about. But what we'll do today is I'm going to cover the two features that we have here and go a little in depth. So the screen I have open here is what we call the Dev Hub management screen. This is where you could actually go ahead and register a Dev Hub. You could go ahead and update any permissions. You could also go ahead and create a scratch org directly from the UI itself. So no need to type out a CLI command for that. Now we're going to come back to the screen. What I'm going to do is jump into the user story management screen. So here's where the Jira capabilities come into play. What we do is we connect to Jira to keep track of user stories and create scratch orgs, create branches, all for those user stories. So we're doing feature-based development. So you'll see at the top here, DW50, it says Bay Area Group. So that's actually the user story that I created, as I showed just a moment ago. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and click the DW50, which will bring us to this screen here, which is, again, what we call our user story management screen. Now, with any process in Salesforce DX, the first step is to register your Dev Hub. We've already done that. We're ready to go. The next step is to create scratch orgs. So what we do is we're tying a user story, and I'm going to assign this user story a scratch org. So I could either say create, so create a brand new scratch org, or I could say assign. So let's say you already have a scratch org, you did some development, and maybe you want to reuse that scratch org. You could go ahead and do that. Just click on assign and reassign one. But for the sake of the demo, what I'm going to do is create a scratch org. So first step here is to select your Dev Hub. So I will select DX Workshop 3. That is my Dev Hub. And you'll see that the scratch org name is automatically populated. So what we do is we take whatever name you have within Jira, be it with your user story, and use that name for your scratch org. Use that name for the branch to make it very easy to understand that this is for that particular user story. Now, you'll see there's a bunch of different options here. All of these are not required. We can still create a scratch org without them. However, if you'd like to expand upon these, you can. So I could add a description. I could change the addition of the scratch org. Now, this is where the power comes in of a scratch org versus something like a developer sandbox. I could create any addition of Salesforce that I want, a developer, enterprise, group, or professional. So I'm going to stick with developer just for the demo. Also, I could apply features. So there's different feature sets. I could select as many features as I like that I want to have as part of this particular scratch org. So be it Sales Wave or Service Cloud or Service Wave, and many different types of features. And same goes for the preferences. There's a number of different options to choose from, and I'm sure you guys are aware of this. This is just coming directly from Salesforce. And we have all these permissions here. Again, to draw a parallel in Salesforce DX using the CLI, these are all commands you'll be writing out, but instead, we're able to do this with just a couple of button clicks. Now, things of this nature, like organization, country, you could really fine-tune your scratch orgs. So as at the top, this is the Dev Hub user context. This is actually the username of my Dev Hub, so that also gets automatically populated. We could add sample data. What this means is it's just going to add the standard data sets that come from Salesforce. When you open accounts, you already have like 30 accounts in there. These are sample data that you can enter in with the scratch org. Now, for some of you that aren't aware, scratch org is an empty org. There's nothing in there except for the standard metadata components. You won't have any of your custom code, so that's something you will have to load in before you even start your development. Same thing goes with data. There is no data in the scratch org other than sample data from Salesforce. Now, other things I could do is I could go ahead and change the duration with an AutoRABIT. As I already mentioned, preferences. I could go ahead and add an admin email. So if you want one of your admins to keep track of your scratch org, make sure things are going good, or you need extra help from an admin perspective, you could always put your admin email here, and it's easy for them to get assigned that scratch org so they could take a look at it in case you run into any issues, at least from a permission standpoint or any sort of configuration changes that you'd need an admin to make. So now my scratch org is created. I click on OK, and you see the screen updated here. Now it gives me my scratch org, DW50, and I get my created date and when it expires. Now, we left it at 7 days, so it's giving me a 7-day period, but again, you can expand that. You can make it 30 days if you want to, and it'll last 30 days. So the next step now, assign a branch. So I'll say assign branch, and similar options here. First thing is I could create a branch from scratch, or I could go ahead and assign an existing branch, or I could register a branch. What this means is, let's say you're using something like GitHub, and you already have a specific branch on there that you just want to use that branch. Maybe you have your own development branch you created there. You can register that specific branch and use that branch instead of assigning something from AutoRABIT or creating something through AutoRABIT. So for today, I will assign a specific branch that I'd like to pick up. So let me select my repository, and I will select the branch I'd like, which I will call as test 5. This is my branch that I use for development, and I want to make sure that whenever I do any sort of check-ins to my branch, I use this particular environment. So I'll click on create, and it'll assign my branch. So you see these buttons are now grayed out. You don't need to go back and do them again because you've already assigned a scratch org, you've already assigned a branch. Now once you've done this, and again, screen updated here, you can see the repository, the branch name, as well as the URL for the particular branch. So I'm using GitHub for this example. So you can see this is populated in GitHub now with the link. Next step now, as I mentioned, scratch orgs don't have any metadata other than your standard components. So if you would like to expand upon a particular feature, you will have to go from a developer sandbox, for example, pull that metadata and deploy that into the scratch org for you to start your development. So any sort of dependencies that you need, you'll have to take care of that before you start development. So I click on load metadata. I could give it a label name and select a source environment. So this could be a developer sandbox, or it could be something from production, for example. You can even pull directly from your dev hub. There's many different options depending on where you'd like to pull these changes from. So I have a specific environment that I will use, and I'm going to click on go. And what this will do is it's logging into the source org that I chose, and it's fetching the metadata components for me. So as you can see here, this lists all the different metadata types that are available in this particular environment. And this is all off the metadata API. So whatever's on that API will be shown as metadata types here. So for my example, I will use an Apex class. And I will select all my classes as this is what I need for my development work. I'll click on deploy. And you'll have a couple of different options here, such as ignore warnings. I could just run this as a validation, maybe just to make sure that I have all my dependencies and I move everything correctly. I could validate this, and I could rerun the process again to do the actual deployment. Take backup. So this enables our rollback facility in AutoRABIT. So this is a functionality that already exists in the standard AutoRABIT when you're using developer sandboxes. But we brought that same functionality as well for scratch orgs. So you could take a rollback in case maybe you put some sort of metadata in there that you don't want. You could just roll back those changes. It'll just create a destructive XML and delete all those components that you just deployed into that scratch org. And lastly is ignore missing visibility settings. This is more so with, do you have a question?
Yes, just for clarification.
Sure.
The backup deletes what it did or restores you back to where you were before you did your stuff?
So basically, it's going to take the metadata components you deployed. We'll take a snapshot of those components. And then if you want to roll back, we're just deleting those components and bringing that scratch org back to its previous state before the deployment.
But if those components overwrote existing data, deleting them or existing metadata, deleting them isn't going to restore my environment.
Can you elaborate on that for me?
Sure, I have a custom object and I deploy some changes to that custom object. When I delete the changes, I don't get what I had before because, let's say simply I changed the field size. If I delete that field, now I don't have the field at all. I don't have the way it was before, I just don't have it.
Exactly. Well, that's if you do a rollback, right? If you choose it, then yes. If you already started development on that field and then you do a rollback, of course, it's deleting that field. Whatever changes you just made on that field is obsolete now, as that field, like you said, is gone. So rollback is really just if you run into issues. If you run into some sort of problem in your feature that you need to do that rollback, that's really what it's used for. Let's just hope you don't use it. But that's really what it's intended for. But you are correct. If you did some sort of development and you do a rollback on that same particular components, you're going to be losing those changes you just made. But I'll get to a way around that in just a second. You'll see as we go through the demo.
Think of a screen layout instead of a field change size. Does that help? Okay.
Same idea.
Oh,
Same idea. All right, so let me move on here. Same thing here. We could also go ahead and select test classes. So if you'd like to run any sort of specific tests, you can do so. It's just like what you see in Apex test execution, same idea. But I won't run any of that for this example. I will click on OK and click on deploy. And this will start the process to actually deploy my particular components that I had selected. So it was about 5 Apex classes. So you'll see here that it's actually sending the request right now to retrieve this metadata from my source org. And right after that, it will actually trigger the deployment itself. So I'm just going to refresh the screen here just to see if this process is finished yet.
So is this using
Still going?
the DX stuff or just using the metadata API?
So in this particular instance, we're using metadata API. So this particular functionality is the same you find in the regular AutoRABIT. For those of you that have seen demos of AutoRABIT, this is the same functionality. We're just extending that functionality we already built from developer sandboxes to Scratch org. So these are existing items that you'll always find. You could always find more information about this on our website as well. So you can see here, this is actually done. I'm just waiting for this to turn into a green check mark, which I'll refresh again, and there we go. Green check mark. All of our components got deployed successfully to our Scratch org in this case. And we even give you a quick summary here, such as the async ID and a couple of other items, just so you know what exactly you just did. So far, just to summarize, we created the dev hub and registered that in AutoRABIT. We created a Scratch org. We signed a branch, and we loaded metadata into that particular Scratch org. Now what I want to do is I want to log into that Scratch org. I want to make some sort of change so I could actually commit that to my branch. So what I'm going to do is jump back into SFDX, and I will jump back into my DevHub management screen, where I can click on this button here to open my Scratch org. So as I click on yes, this will open up my Scratch org for me, log me in, so I don't have to type a username or password. We already have that set up, and it'll just directly log me into my Scratch org. So once this is logged in, I will select a specific class. You can see here's all the items that I just deployed. So I'll take creating account. So this is a Apex class that I have, and I'll keep it simple. I'll just make a comment change here just to create a difference report. So let's just say this is a demo for Bay Area group. So I made my change, and I'll click on save. So I made a very simple change to my class. What I'll do now is jump back into AutoRABIT, and I need to go back to my user story management screen where I could access my particular user story so I could go ahead and commit these changes to my particular branch. So select DW50, and I'll say new commit. So when I click on new commit, you're going to notice one thing. Everything is already mapped for you here. It automatically picked up my Scratch org, which is the DW50, that's the name we gave it. It also went ahead and picked my repository, which is what we mapped it with, as well as my branch I assigned it. And the author is the author that was created when we created the Scratch org. So that's your user for that particular Scratch org. So I'll say fetch changes, and you do have the option to apply a filter. This is going to be a date filter. So let's say I only want to pick up metadata from last Monday. I could say that and only fetch changes from that Monday up until the time I run that process. So, if there's a lot of changes, it's going to save you some trouble. But, with respect to Scratch orgs, you might not run into that issue, as Scratch orgs only are limited. Eventually, they'll get deleted, and you're starting back over again. So you may not need to use that often, but it is there in case you need to. So what AutoRABIT is doing right now is fetching all the different metadata types that there are and seeing what's changed. And this is happening based off of the last modified date in Salesforce. So we're going to scratch org, finding the last modified date based off of this particular author and picking the changes. So here's some of the changes. So this will list some of the changes that are standard. But what we have is all of our particular classes that we deployed, as well as here's the creating account that I just modified. So I'll click on that particular component. And again, you don't have to select all components. You can select one component. You can select as many as you like. You do have the option to do so. Now down here, you see ALM system label. So as I mentioned, we're tied integration with Jira. So it automatically picked up my project, my sprint, gave me my particular user story. So there's the Bay Area dev group. That's the user story that we've been working on. And here I could update the status of that user story. So if my particular user story was just to create a class or edit a particular class, I could say, all right, well, I'm done. My user story is done. I'll commit my changes and say my user story is finished now. Now there's a couple of different options that are here. The very first one is commit. That's pretty straightforward. We click on commit. It'll just commit our changes to the branch that we assigned. So no drama there. However, the next option here is compare and commit. Now what compare and commit does is it's going to compare the component I selected here between the scratch org as well as my branch. So let's say this is something that I already checked into my branch and maybe I made another change. So this will give me an idea as far as what was my previous change and what is it that I'm about to commit. So I could see the difference report before I actually make a commit. And the last option here is validate and commit. Now this is what I call the most loaded option, as this has two halves to it. The first half is what we call a pre-validation step. What this does is it's going to run a deployment validation across a particular sandbox you choose to. So after a scratch org, typically you'll probably be deploying this into another developer sandbox maybe, or it's going to be to an integration sandbox. So you could actually test these components and validate that deployment across an integration sandbox, for example, just to see, is my deployment going to succeed when I ultimately get to that step? Or if I'm missing any dependencies, am I going to face any errors? Does some other developer have some component that I need? This will answer all those questions. Second, we'll run Apex tests. You can manually choose those tests or automatically they'll be picked up. We'll also run code coverage as well as static code analysis. So this is what comprises our pre-validation step. And lastly, we also do give you that same difference report I spoke about in the compare and commit feature. It's the same idea, we will give you that difference report. So the second half of that is what we call an approval process. So it's much like Salesforce. You would go ahead as a release manager, for example, a developer sent in a commit. You'll go there, you'll have approve or reject. So there'll be a report. You could see the code coverage, static code analysis, all that good stuff, and be able to say, I want to approve this developer to commit these changes to their branch. Or maybe that developer didn't meet the code coverage, or maybe there's a lot of errors in their Apex class in terms of a static code analysis point of view, and you want them to revisit that. You can reject that commit. So two halves, and that's what I will run you guys through right now. So I clicked on validate and commit. Here's the option to validate on Salesforce org. So I'm going to use my particular environment again. I could say show code level differences. I could also, check in with the DX folder structure if I'd like to. I could run static analysis and I could run Apex tests. So this will dynamically pick up some tests, especially if you have it as part of your commit like I do, it will automatically pick up those tests. Or in just a second here, you'll see that you can also manually enter in tests. So if there's one specific test that you'd like to run, you could just hit the type in that test, click add, we'll automatically be able to pick that up from the destination. Now here's where I'll provide my reviewer's email ID. This is the person that'll get that email saying, hey, there's a validated commit. Would you like to approve or reject it? So I will give my email here just to make it a little easier. And I can provide a comment here. So I will just say demo in this case, but this comment is what will be used when you actually make the check-in in GitHub, for example. So I'll say proceed for validation. And this will trigger my validation process where it'll run all these steps that I just selected. So as we jump here, this is going to be the commit validation history page. Now, let me go ahead and find where my particular commit is. And here it is. Here's my process that is running. So this will take about a minute or two to completely finish as we're fetching tests, running them. Then we have to analyze those Apex classes to make sure from a static code analysis point of view. Then we have to run the deployment validation. So it'll take about a minute or two. But what I will do while this is running is show you a different process that I've already ran with the same class, just to show you what that looks like. So the process right above here is one that I had ran previously when I was doing my testing. And you can see there's green check marks all the way across, which is perfect. That's what we'd like. That's what we all hope to see. So the very first option here is the summary page. Here on the left-hand side, I get an audit trail, basically, what's the label name, who triggered this particular validate and commit, what was the org that was used, what was my particular branch, all of that information that can be useful. Now on the right-hand side, we have the class. So again, the same class I used in today's example, I also used when I ran this particular process. So this allows you to see what are the components that are about to be committed into that particular branch. So next up, we have Apex tests. So here, there's not much to see here as there's only one test. However, if you have a lot of Apex classes, this will become more apparent. So you can see the amount of lines that are covered. You can see the coverage percentage, which is 100, which is awesome for us. And you can even see the test coverage as well. Now again, the more tests you have, the more information this particular screen will provide you. So next up will be our static code analysis. So as I click on this, we have one class here, and this will provide you, whatever coding errors you have, or are you following the coding best practices. So within AutoRABIT, we use Apex PMD to provide this static code analysis. So some of you might be familiar with that. They have their own rule sets, particularly for Salesforce, and that's what we use. And those particular rule sets are already defined. This is out of box from AutoRABIT, so nothing for you to download or anything like that. Once you actually purchase AutoRABIT, you already have Apex PMD there, so you can already run these static code analysis reports. But as you can see, this just has some rule sets. So in our case, it looks like all classes and interfaces must belong to a named package, and a couple of errors that we could find. We give you the violations as well as the priority of this violation. So for these ones, it's priority 3. So, and again, this is all coming from Apex PMD. And a common question I get all the time is, well, what if I have specific rule sets that I want to add? Just to make sure my developers and my team are following these rules. That can be done. We could easily add that in the back end and give you that particular rule sets that you like. And that's something we do as part of our implementation. We'll ask you, what are the rules you'd like to have aside from what's already existing in Apex PMD? So that is definitely possible. So let me jump back here to this screen. Next, we have deploy and validation. So this is the same screen that you'll see in a different part of AutoRABIT as well, for those of you that have seen it. And you can see it validated my one component here, and it also went ahead and ran my test that I selected. So it automatically picked up the test class associated to this Apex class and ran that particular class for me. And again, just like the load metadata screen I showed, you get that similar view with all the information as well as async ID, all that good stuff. So let me see how our process is doing. So it looks like our process did complete. As you can see, there are green check marks all the way across, which is perfect. Now let me jump into our process now to show you the difference report. So here's our particular class. Now what you see here is you can see whether this exists in your Salesforce org and whether this particular component exists in version control. And you can also see the differences. So in my case, this component already does exist. I've already committed this before. So you can see the difference. This is what I'm about to check in, and this is what's already existing in that particular branch. So you'll be able to identify these differences at a code level, and we'll highlight them in green on the Salesforce org side as well as red in the branch side. So once I've reviewed all of this, there's one step left to do. I could go ahead and say approve, in this case, as everything went well, or I could also reject. And as I click on approve here, you'll see this commit button is now available. So if I go back to some of these other processes, for example, this one is a horrible process, and obviously this is a commit that needs to be rejected, but what you notice here, the commit button is grayed out. So until somebody approves this, you're not going to be able to commit this. So this is what we call our gated check-in. Whole point behind this is to make sure you're only checking in the most healthiest code into your particular branch. Be it a scratch org, be it for a particular branch created for that scratch org, be it an actual branch used for developer sandboxes, they're all the same. So for this one, I could just say reject because obviously nothing worked, everything failed here, so I rejected that particular commit. So as I jump back to our user story, I can now click on the commit button. I could say yes, one final review to see what I'm about to commit, and I could click on OK. And this will run my commit process and check into my branch. So it'll take just a moment here for this to go ahead and give me my result. And what you'll see is it gives you a detailed report of what I just committed. So let me give this one moment here to give me that commit history.
While we're waiting.
Sure.
When you did the submit for approval, basically, you identified who the approver is, yet you have the list of changes. I didn't see the approver's name there. Is that a common screen that everybody sees, or is it specific to the logged in user who's assigned to approve?
So in that particular example, it's whoever's assigned to it. So that reviewer will get that email to be able to see your name there and be able to approve or reject that particular commit. So if you have the permission in AutoRABIT to see it, you'll be able to see that particular name. So as you see here, the commit went through. We give you the author, the date and timestamp, as well as the revision number directly from GitHub in our case. So you wouldn't have to log into GitHub, see my commit go through, what is my revision number, all of that is right here. We also let you know what is the file path as far as the class, as well as the particular name of that metadata component. So now we went ahead and actually committed our code into our particular branch. That's great and all, but now our scratch org is going to be expired. This is feature-based, right? So we created scratch off our user story. I've committed it to a branch. I'm set. So if my scratch org expires, it doesn't matter to me anymore because I'm not going to use that scratch org anymore. I could go ahead and create a new one for my next feature. But it doesn't stop there when it comes to DX. Sure, it's in my feature branch, but I need to move this into integration branch and QA branch and so on, which is where merging comes into play. Or when you have two developers, what if they're working on the same class? You might run into some conflicts. This is where the conflict resolution comes into play. So what I can do is, let me go back to my user story management again. And what we'll do is I'll show you briefly what we call our merge editor looks like. So I can't run a complete example on this, but I can give you an idea. So as you can see, the buttons are laid out in a perfect order. So you'll follow these buttons. You'll say assign scratch org, assign the branch, load metadata, make your changes, then new commit, new merge. So we laid it out in such a way where you just follow the buttons. There's no second guessing yourself. You know where you are throughout the process. So this is what the merge screen looks like. You can see it automatically picked up my repository as well as the branch I assigned that particular scratch org. And I could just pick another branch that I would like to merge into. So for this case, we'll just use master just to give an example. Now there's a couple of examples here for merge types. I could do an entire branch merge, which will take everything I have in a particular branch and just merge that into master in this case. I could pick a specific revision. So let's say I only want to pick one specific revision. I could select my revision, and here's the revision that I want. I could select that, say merge, and only merge that one revision. Or I could use different types of labels, such as release labels, which is if you have a big release coming up and you want to take all of your developers' work, put it into a singular label, so it makes it easier to move this code into the higher branches as well as environments, you would use a release label. Now, in our case, I will use a commit label just to show this. And you can see down here, DW50, there's our particular label that was created when I made that commit. And once all that's done, you could also send a merge report. This will send however many people you like. You could just put everybody's username here, AutoRABIT users that is, and it'll send them an email letting them know this is the merge report. Here's what's ready to be merged. Here's what's conflicting. Here's the differences. So we'll send you that report for any sort of review you'd like to do.
Yeah, is any of the commit history written back to Jira?
Absolutely. So when we make that commit, what happens is we're going to give you a complete audit trail in Jira. So for example, in the comments section, we'll say this is the date and timestamp. Here's a person that made this commit. Here's the particular revision number for that commit, as well as here's the specific components that were actually committed. So if you ever go back to that user story, you could track that information. And that same information can be found on AutoRABIT as well. So 2 different places.
Does the label batch up multiple commits? Is that
Yep. So the idea behind the release label is it's going to take multiple labels that you might have created. So I selected a commit label here, right? That's a singular label. That's typically going to be used by just one developer and tying as many commits as you like to that label. But if I have 10 developers using custom labels, that's 10 different custom labels, right? It's going to be hard to take all that and merge into higher branches. Go one by one, merge them all. That's why we have a release label. Just bundle it all up and makes it much easier to move down the process. So there's 2 options here. I could either say dry run, which is like validating a deployment. It'll validate the merge, just let me know, are there any conflicts, or am I ready just to go ahead and merge, and I could just rerun the process to actually trigger that merge. or I could click on merge, which will actually merge the particular components. So what I will do is, I can't show that particular component, but I will run over to our merge history to show you a previously ran process and what that looks like. So, for example, here's a particular process that ran, and you could see that the status is conflicting. So there were particular conflicts in this example, or if everything went well, I could just say merged, and it'll just go ahead and merge those particular components and update the status again. Another example is already up to date. So let's say that you're trying to merge a particular file that already exists in that branch. It's there. There's no need to go ahead and do another merge. So we'll let you know that, hey, this file's already there, so your branch is already up to date. There's no need to do this. So we'll alert you in many different ways. Now, we also do have the conflict reports. Now, this one here is just letting you know this particular example doesn't have a code level difference. Now, the difference report would look the same way that I showed you in the difference report and the validate and commit feature. This example is showing that this file, again, exists in both branches. So we'll still identify that as a conflict just to let you know that, hey, this file exists. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Or do you want to choose a particular file? Or what would you like to do? So we will still identify that and let you know, but we won't show code differences here as the file is exactly the same. But if there are conflicts, you do have options to resolve. For example, I could use a local file, which would be my destination branch in this case, remote file, which would be my local branch, or I could use specific text blocks, which I know these are grayed out. Yeah, I could use specific text blocks, or I could say, hey, I want to keep both lines of code, meaning I want to keep whatever's in my remote as well as my local. I want to keep both lines of code. Maybe I would use it later. Maybe my developer's on vacation, for example, and I can't really reach out to that person to resolve this conflict. I could keep both so it doesn't hold up my release. I still keep going. I just make sure things are going to go through. However, I maintain both lines of code. So if there's any problems, we could address that later at a later date, but I can still go through my release. So that's essentially how our merge editor works. Now, the last couple of buttons that are here that I'd like to cover, just briefly, we won't dive into them really, is new deployment. That's just the same thing as load metadata. It'll bring you into the Scratch org this time. So you could actually deploy those particular components, or let's say I want to pull directly from my branch. I could pull from my branch, deploy that into Integration Sandbox, for example. So this is where I'm taking whatever code I just checked into my branch and I'm moving that to the next sandbox. We can validate a Scratch org, so that's just to check whether my Scratch org is created successfully, does it work? Before I even start my development process, I could validate that. Run Apex tests. You could choose Apex tests to run as well on the Scratch org manually from here, or you could use it as part of the process. Both ways do work. And of course, data migration. As I mentioned, there's no data when it comes to Scratch orgs other than standard data if you choose to select that option. So if I want specific data to be in my Scratch org that I would like to test against, I could actually load some of the data into there using our Data Loader Pro facility that we have. And it'll allow you to load that data just in org-to-org migration. So that's really it as far as what I would like to show for today. So I think at this point, we just open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, any more questions?
Yeah, so you showed some nice features that are leveraging what's available in DX now, but how about the packaging 2 stuff on the DX roadmap? Like, do you have any designs or plans yet for being able to build packages from AutoRABIT, things like that?
Yeah, so those are things we are planning. Now, again, this isn't beta. It's constantly in development. We're always changing things. To give you an idea, this UI looked different yesterday compared to now. So we're constantly developing this and making it as best as we can. Now, we know all the changes that Salesforce is making. We're working closely with a lot of the people from Salesforce. Some of you know Wade Wagner and a few others. We are working with them closely to see what are they coming up with, so we could also make sure we provide that facility in AutoRABIT as well. So this just to make it in parallel, whatever the Salesforce builds, we want to make sure we can support that. So the answer is yes, we will be bringing something like that out as well.
Anybody else? Yeah.
So it wasn't clear if you sort of adopted the DX development methodology and you were pushing directly from source and how that would work.
Well, so development-wise, we can basically, whatever strategy you would like to employ, we can support with our tool. So, for example, if you would like to fetch your components from a particular environment, you can do that, but you could also load it from a particular branch. And when it comes to, but ideally, when it comes to, we want to go with a feature-based development approach. So if you have long-term projects, then you might want to use, like a standard, like, Developer Pro or something like that along those lines. But the smaller components that you can create in like 7 to 30 days, you would ideally create a scratch org, then probably create a clone from the master branch as a one-to-one to production. Then deploy all those components into your scratch org, for example. Then create your changes, commit those back onto the branch, merge this scratch org branch back to the master branch, and then deploy to production. Does it make sense? Yeah.
Let me add on to that comment. The DX vision is source of truth has now moved to DX, not from the orgs. We've been doing that for 3 years. That's the mantra outside of the Salesforce community. Is the source of truth is your repository, right? Your master branch, and not the orgs. And with all of our customers, they do that whether they're doing DX or not. They do that with a regular developer sandbox. Everything gets pushed into the repository, and that's the source of truth. So we're doing that right now with every customer. That's the proper vision. That's the proper development environment.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to keep your main development sandbox as a source of truth, but use version control. And also allows you, let's say you have not one, but if you work with Schneider Electric, we have 150 developers, right? So they work as teams. Maybe you separate them by apps. So one app per development environment, for example. They work on the components, and then they commit to a branch dedicated to this particular dev sandbox. And then we can merge those changes into an integration branch. So if we have, let's say, 15 different development branches, we can merge every single one into the integration branch. So the conflict resolution at the very beginning of your process, and you can see with the check-in gate, even before it even enters version control, we can say yay or nay. So no, your code is bad, your code is good. You can go ahead, you work on your stuff some more. And then once the conflict resolution is done, everything afterwards we can automate. So as soon as you commit to the integration branch and the merge is successful, with webhooks in the repository, we can have CI processes that pick up those changes. They can then deploy those, validate those the components. They can then, as a second step, execute a data load, recreate parent-child relationships automatically. Automatically handle parent-child the circular references and the self-lookup fields, and then also run functional test scripts. We are also able to automatically, automate the pre and post deployment steps, for example. So that means in the end, you could run everything through your ALM tool. Picking up the user story, creating the component development, commit to the branch, merge to integration, and then everything else just automatically moves all the way to production. If you want, you could deploy every single day, just depending on the status of your Jira ticket. Because our CI processes can even understand, is my Jira ticket still in progress or is it in done stage? Even if those components are in the same branch, our CI processes can just pick up those revisions, mark as done, while leaving the ones in progress alone. Any more questions?
Yeah, so you mentioned an important point that you've been adopting the version control as a sole source of truth mantra before DX was around. As an ISV, we do that too. I'm curious, what are the biggest benefits you've seen from integrating DX into the product, since you had kind of built sort of the general idea before DX was out? Now that you've got DX in there, is it just more efficient, faster, or something, or is there some other big benefits that you've seen that have come out of this, or perhaps maybe the benefits that you expect to see soon which you haven't implemented yet?
At least for my part, what I can see is just it gives you more flexibility and it's faster because you can spin up in minutes instead of waiting for something to be created. When it comes to spinning up a new sandbox, and it also allows you, for example, let's just think about a hotfix. If you want to create hotfixes, now you can just spin up a hotfix scratch org. You clone from master, create a hotfix branch, deploy it to the hotfix environment, and then make a change again, and do the process that I explained earlier. Commit to the branch back, merge to master, and then deploy the hotfix real fast, and then back merge those changes all the way down the line, all the way to the dev environments. So I think it just in general helps, facilitate what we already have been, preaching for the last 3 years. But then, if you are from Java or .NET, they have been doing the same thing for the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. It's just that Salesforce has to catch up a little bit, you know.
About the granular metadata, have you seen any benefits from that? So they take the object metadata and break it out, that sort of stuff.
You're an ISV, and if there's in our community, they will say that we will say that the greatest value for the Scratchworks and really DX is going to be to the ISVs, to the hardcore guys, at the beginning. For our clients now, and for we got the top of the market, right? So that even the most advanced teams, they're not asking for that right now. They're not asking for Scratchworks. Everyone wants it because it's new. They want to try it out, but there's a lot of window dressing right now. You guys are going to get the most value out of it.
Yeah, I know that's one of the big changes is the granular metadata, and I think it would maybe make code merges easier or faster or something. But maybe it's optional too, so maybe you guys aren't using it.
Well, the trick is going to be to merge that with the declarative guys that are just in a regular sandbox, and that's what our tool is going to offer you. Whereas everyone who's trying to do a homegrown solution and try to experiment with a Scratchwork and not take it all the way, is going to have the issues.
Yeah, just to add on to that, it is going to go back to what I said earlier. There's a lot of changes within Salesforce DX from a packaging, from an artifacting standpoint. There's a lot of different changes that are coming in. We are taking them into account. Not all of them are here in AutoRABIT yet. Again, we're still in beta when it comes to Salesforce DX, but those are coming up. Now, have we seen big performance changes? Absolutely. We do see that it's a little bit faster than using developer sandboxes, but at least as far as we're concerned, it's negligible differences. When you use AutoRABIT with CI and deployments and everything, you're going to be not seeing those particular time changes. We can because we do this every day. We're always doing demos, all this fun stuff. So we see this day in and day out, so we know what the advantages are. But from just strictly that metadata standpoint, we are using parts of that right now. You might have noticed when I was doing a check-in, it allowed you to say check-in with Salesforce DX folder structure. So that's something we're working with, for example. But again, not everything's in yet. As we're building this out, this will hopefully go live here pretty soon. We'll actually try to make sure we have as many improvements as we can as we go forward.
I know this is a DX day, but you guys have been around before DX. I assume that all of the sources and all of the destination orgs can be other than DX and can be other than prod and dev orgs and those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So pretty much everything I've showed today, just one part of it is a scratch org. Really, the only thing that's new would be this particular section. Salesforce DX Beta. You can see all the different features of AutoRABIT. These are already here available. Whether you have developer sandboxes, using production, or whatever it is that you're using, we can support that. Be it trial orgs, be it IC partner orgs, whatever it is, we could actually integrate with that. We can support it, and you can still use the same features and it'll work exactly the same way. Jeff, want to add to that, or?
Well, yeah. So in general, just that basically in AutoRABIT, you can use anything for the source, anything for the destination. That is true for metadata and also for data. So we can, for example, pull from production, move somewhere else, but we could also, like for one client, we did it that they wanted to move from one production org to 5, so we split their data into 5 different products, for example. So that, for us, it doesn't matter really where you go, where you're coming from.
Thank you.
Any questions?
You've got a great product here that solves a great problem, very
Thank you.
important problem to particularly large development environments. And you started this certainly before DX was out, and when DX came out, Salesforce kind of drew a line in the sand. Here's how we're going to do development in larger environments with CI, continuous deployment, and continuous integration. And with a command line interface right now, it's pretty clear. I would expect the roadmap for Salesforce to say, hey, the CLI is sort of the first step to getting to a GUI interface for this sort of thing that kind of puts you head to head with them. It kind of comes to your relationship with Salesforce. Of course, you've already got a pretty loyal customer base. I'm sure that loves the product and wants to grow with you. But you're sort of kind of playing this relationship with Salesforce. Functionality could change that keeps you continuing to play catch up with Salesforce, especially once they come out with the GUI interface. What's sort of your plan in the future for either working with Salesforce or creating additional functionality?
Yeah, so first of all, we were working very closely with Salesforce. So when they had the idea of creating a DX itself, they actually approached us and also others in the same niche market. But in the end, it turned, we turned out to be, the closest partner with them, together with Schneider Electric, which is one of our clients. One of the examples I gave earlier, where they ran this pilot to see like how would DX actually work with a large company that employs like 100 plus, I think almost like 150 developers, and how DX can be used in this way. And it was a big success. And so right now, Schneider Electric actually uses DX exclusively for their complete deployments and development stream in general. And so I think that this relationship between us and Salesforce clients and Salesforce themselves will just continue the way we have been doing, which is just keep a close eye on it and be in close contact with everybody. And so far, this has worked out really well for everyone. Anyone else?
Any other questions? I'll add a little bit to that answer. If you want to ask the question what the timeline might be, say, oh, they've released DX and the UI was supposed to be announced at Dreamforce. Did anyone hear? I didn't make it around enough to hear, but it was actually announced. They were going to a GUI for the CLI. They told us that they plan to announce that at least on the roadmap. Packaging's coming out, but we don't really see that it's going to be a complete end-to-end solution, fully baked, for another couple of years. And out there to a point where the hundreds of thousands of declarative programmers out there that are working on Salesforce orgs right now, what would it take for them to get to here, even with a GUI interface? We're talking about putting up another 20 modules in Trailhead and getting them all. We're 5 to 7 years away from the vision that you're asking about. Really, realistically, on the ground. Right now, we're helping teams, get their stuff done and run faster, and so we're super valuable to Salesforce. No one else can take that 150 team at Schneider Electric and get them to run as fast as they run, such that they can actually get that kind of ROI out of the platform, right? It's no longer a CRM tool. It's hey, shut down your SAP, shut down your IBM, shut down everything else, and build it on Force. Okay, well, what tools do you have for that? How am I realistically, how am I going to put 100 developers in a room and have them not step on each other's toes? And how am I going to do anything? I mean, it's just insane, right? You need something, and DX is their answer to that, but it's from a very theoretical, pure standpoint. Here's how it should be done, and the top level developers are going to be able to take advantage of that. Everybody else is going to be struggling, and that's where we come in. So I think we got quite a bit of run.
Great.
Yeah, maybe the last one will be we're an end-to-end solution. So it's not just about the development part of it, but also when it comes to the DevOps, release management, the testing of functional test scripts, the data migration itself, and then also being able to just make it really simple to create a release. As you see with those labels, if you have several commits per label, and I can just group it into a release itself, and I can edit this. So I can say, okay, I had these 15 components, but now this one component turns out it's going to be for the next release. I just uncheck this box, and I've updated my release already, and I say, okay, this is the source of my deployment, and bam, it goes out. It just it saves you an incredible amount of time. So in the end, all you have to do as a developer is worry about your user stories, create your components, commit to the branch, and you're done. And you will not have to worry about whether my deployment will fail or not, because we already tested everything. Once you committed your changes, because otherwise it would have been rejected. Any more questions? We have another 5 minutes. But if not,
That means we've demoed everything and answered our questions.
yeah.
Well, I guess so.
Awesome. Then just thank you all very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.